News of the Valora Prime rescue spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Species that had dismissed humanity as insignificant now watched the operation with growing unease. And in the great chamber of the Galactic Concord, delegates gathered to debate what the humans were truly doing. High Commander Thiessen of the Varrock Dominion stood before the assembly with barely contained fury. The Boirim Vorok were massive reptilian beings who had conquered 17 species on their rise to power. And they understood strength in only one form. The humans are not performing a rescue, Thiessen declared, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. They are performing a manipulation, and we would be fools to miss the obvious strategy. Several delegates murmured in agreement. Consider the facts, Thiessen continued. A weak species gains nothing from helping weaker species unless there is hidden profit. And the humans must be positioning themselves to exploit the Valori once the crisis passes. Ambassador Una Park stood in the human delegation area, exhausted from coordinating the relief effort, but refusing to show weakness. High Commander, she said calmly, I assure you there is no hidden strategy, and we are simply helping people who need help. Impossible, Thiessen snapped. No species acts without self-interest. And your denial only proves you are hiding your true intentions. Counselor Vethela shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His observer, Catherine, had sent detailed reports about the human behavior on Valora Prime. And those reports had left the Threskin counselor more confused than he had ever been in his long career. Perhaps, Vethel said slowly, we should wait for more information before making judgments. This caused a stir among the assembly. Vave, Alal, had been among the loudest voices against human membership, and his sudden caution surprised everyone on Valora Prime. Healer Sujin Kang worked in a makeshift medical station that had been assembled from salvaged materials and human supplies. She had not slept in 36 hours. But the steady stream of injured Valori demanded her attention. Human medicine was considered primitive by galactic standards. Their equipment was outdated. Their techniques were basic, and their understanding of alien physiology was limited. But Sujin had something the advanced medical systems of other species lacked. She had experience treating trauma Earth's violent. History had taught humanity painful lessons about healing the broken, and those lessons applied across species. Lion's pain was universal. Fear was universal. The need for gentle hands and kind words was universaltish. Watched from a nearby cot as Sujin treated an elderly Valori whose legs had been crushed in the collapse. The human healer's movements were careful and precise. But what struck Tealish most was the expression on her face. Sujin was crying. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she worked, and she made no effort to hide them. You are leaking, Tealish observed with confusion. Are you damaged? Sujin looked up and managed a small smile despite her tears. No, I am not damaged, she said softly. Humans do this when we feel strong emotions. And right now I feel sad for everyone who is suffering. You feel our pain. Yes. In a way we do. Tealish considered this for a long moment. It seems very inconvenient. She finally said. Sujin laughed despite everything. A warm sound that seemed impossible, given the devastation around them. It is inconvenient, she admitted. But it also reminds us why we keep fighting, and why we cannot give up even when everything seems hopeless. Outside the medical station, the rescue operation faced a new crisis. Aftershocks from the initial geological collapse were increasing in frequency and intensity, and the remaining stable sections of underground infrastructure were beginning to fail. Dr. Minji Cho gathered her engineering team around a holographic display showing the latest seismic data. We have approximately 12 hours before a cascade failure, she reported grimly. When it happens, everything still standing will come down. Can we evacuate everyone in time? asked Taewan. Minji shook her head slowly. We have 7,000 Valori in the remaining underground sections, and many are too injured to move quickly. And our transport capacity cannot handle those numbers. In that time frame, the numbers were clear. The math was simple. Standard protocol said to evacuate everyone possible and accept the losses that could not be prevented. What are our options? Asked Commander Yeho-sung, who had arrived with reinforcement ships just hours earlier. Minji pulled up structural diagrams on the display. We could try to reinforce the most unstable sections, she said. Use our ships as anchors and our equipment as bracing. And it might buy enough time to get everyone out. And if it fails, then we lose our ships and probably everyone trying to hold the line. Yeho looked at the faces around him. They were exhausted and afraid and far from home. But not one of them suggested abandoning the trapped Valori to their fate. Do it, he ordered. Use everything we have. The operation that followed would be studied by military academies across the galaxy for centuries. Human ships descended into unstable canyons and pressed their hulls against collapsing walls. Using their structural integrity as support beams, engineers rappelled into failing tunnels to install emergency bracing. Knowing that any tremor could bring the ceiling down on their heads, rescue workers carried injured Valori on their backs through passages that grew narrower with every passing hour in the Concord chamber. High Commander Thiessen received reports from his own observers and grew increasingly agitated. They are sacrificing their vessels, he said with disbelief. They are literally destroying their own fleet to save a species that cannot possibly repay them. Perhaps repayment is not the point, Arbiter Solon suggested quietly. That is absurd, Thiessen insisted. Everything has a price, and every action seeks reward. And this is the fundamental truth of the galaxy. Is it? Solon asked. Or is it simply the truth the strong have told themselves to justify their cruelty? The ancient Miralith turned their crystalline gaze toward the display showing the rescue operation. I have lived for 60,000 years, Solon continued, and I have seen empires rise and fall. And I have watched species destroy themselves and each other in pursuit of power. And in all that time I believed I understood what strength meant. They paused, watching a human ship sacrifice its shields to protect the rescue shuttle. I am beginning to wonder if I understood anything at all. On Valora Prime, the cascade failure came earlier than predicted. The ground heaved and split and roared with the anger of a dying world. And in the chaos that followed, humans stood between destruction and the innocent. 3 more died that day. Their names were Minjin Choi, Haeum-young, and Sejin Yoon. They died holding up a ceiling that should have been impossible to hold, buying precious minutes that allowed 200 Valori to reach safety when the dust finally settled. The numbers were tallied: 6 million Valori survived, 5 million were lost. The humans mourned both numbers equally. Tealish found Sergeant Dohan sitting alone outside the medical station, staring at the stars with empty eyes. Your people died for us, she said softly. Sitting beside him, yes. You are sad. Yes. Then why did you come here? Tealish asked. Why did you sacrifice so much for strangers? You will never know. Dohan was quiet for a long moment. Because someone had to, he finally said. And because we could not live with ourselves if we did not try. Tealish reached out and placed her small hand on his arm. My people wish to speak for yours, she said. At the Great Concord, we wish to tell them what you did here. Dohan looked at her with surprise. You do not have to do that. I know, Tealish replied. But I want to, and wanting to help without needing to is something humans have taught me. For the first time in days, Dohan smiled. The great chamber of the Galactic Concord had never been so full. Every member species sent their highest representatives, and the observation galleries overflowed with diplomats and journalists and curious citizens from 100 worlds. They had all come to witness humanity's judgment. Ambassador Unipark stood at the center of the speaking floor once more. But this time, she did not feel small. She felt the weight of every human who had sacrificed everything on Valora Prime. And that weight gave her strength she had never known before. "Before we proceed," Arbiter Solon announced, their crystalline voice carrying through the vast space, "we have received a formal request from the Valori delegation to address this assembly." Murmurs rippled through the chamber the Valori had never addressed. The full Concord before they had always been too insignificant to warrant attention. Tealish walked forward on legs that were still healing from her ordeal. Her small form dwarfed by the massive chamber. She wore no fine robes or symbols of office. She was simply a survivor who had something to say. "I am nobody important," she began, her voice quiet but steady. "I am not a leader or a warrior or a great thinker. And by the standards of this chamber, I have nothing to offer." She looked around at the assembled delegates, meeting eyes that had never bothered to notice her species before. "When my world collapsed, I watched this Concord debate whether my people were worth saving. And the answer was no, and we were too weak and too poor, and too unimportant to matter." Her voice grew stronger. Then the humans came. Tealish described what she had witnessed. She spoke of strangers who dug through rubble for days without sleep. She spoke of medics who cried while treating patients they had never met. She spoke of soldiers who threw themselves over children when the ceiling collapsed. She spoke of young Jai and Soyan who died so that 4 Valori children could live. "I asked the humans why they would sacrifice themselves for us," Tealish said. "They told me we needed them, and that was enough." She turned to face the assembled powers of the galaxy. "I did not understand at first," she admitted. "I had lived my whole life in a galaxy where the strong crushed the weak and called it natural order. And I could not imagine a species that measured strength differently." Her eyes found Unipark in the crowd. "Now I understand," Tealish continued. "The humans taught me that true strength is not the power to destroy, and true strength is the will to protect. And true strength is choosing to help, even when it costs you everything." She straightened to her full height, which was still barely half the size of most delegates. "The Valori formally request that the Galactic Concord grant humanity full membership. And we pledge our eternal friendship to the species that saved us when no one else would." The chamber erupted in noise as delegates debated and argued and shouted over each other. High Commander Thiessen rose from the Varrock delegation, his scales flushed with anger. "This is sentimentality dressed as wisdom," he declared. "The humans have demonstrated nothing but foolish disregard for their own survival. And such a species will bring instability and chaos to the Concord." 6 other delegations voiced agreement. Counselor Vethel stood slowly, his massive insectoid form commanding attention. The chamber fell silent, for everyone knew Vethel had been among the loudest voices against humanity. "I came to this debate certain that humans were weak," Vethel admitted. "I saw their fragile bodies and primitive technology and small territory, and I judged them by the standards I had always used." He paused, his compound eyes reflecting the lights of 1,000 worlds. "I was wrong." This caused more murmuring than anything else that had been said. "My observer on Valora Prime sent me reports that I did not want to believe," Vethel continued. He described humans who carried wounded strangers until their legs failed, who shared their air with dying children, who fought impossible odds because surrender was simply not something they were capable of. He turned to look at Unipark. "The Threskin measures strength by what we can conquer, and we have conquered much. And yet I wonder now what we have built that will last." His voice dropped lower. "The humans measure strength by what they refuse to let go. And I believe they will hold on to each other until the stars themselves grow cold." Vethel returned to his seat without another word. Arbiter Solon rose from their ancient throne. "I have presided over this Concord for 10,000 years," they said. I have watched empires expand and collapse, and I have seen species rise to greatness and fall to ruin. And all that time I believed I understood power, the crystalline being moved to the center of the chamber, their form catching the light in ways that seemed almost supernatural. When this concord was founded, it was not built by conquerors, Solon continued. It was built by survivors of a war so terrible that the scars still mark 100 worlds. And those survivors swore to create something better. They paused. Somewhere along the way, we forgot what better meant. And we convinced ourselves that strength was domination, and power was control, and the weak existed only to serve the strong. Solon turned to face the full assembly. The humans have reminded us of something we should never have forgotten, the ancient. Arbiter's voice rang through the chamber like bells. What is strength? If not the will to bear another's burden, and what is power? If not the choice to protect those who cannot protect themselves? They raised one crystalline limb. I call for the vote. The voting proceeded in silence. Each delegation registered their choice, and the numbers appeared on the great display at the center of the chamber when the final tally was shown. Una Park felt tears streaming down her face. Humanity had been granted full membership in the Galactic Concord, but more than that, something had changed. A vote had not been. Close species that had mocked humanity a month ago had voted in their favor. Powers that had dismissed compassion as weakness had been forced to reconsider as the chamber began to empty. Delegates approached the human section with offers of friendship and alliance. The Valori formally requested a permanent partnership. 3 smaller species asked for protection agreements, even Counselor Vethal stopped before Una on his way out. I do not understand you. Species, the massive Threskin admitted. I have studied your history and your biology and your culture, and none of it explains what I witnessed on Valora Prime. Una met his compound eyes without flinching. You do not have to understand us, she said. You just have to know that when darkness comes, we will be standing beside you. And that is what strength means to humans. Vethel made a gesture that his translator identified as respect. Perhaps someday I will learn to see the galaxy as you do, he said. Perhaps someday we all will. Una replied later that night. Una stood on the observation deck of the Concorde station, watching the stars wheel slowly past Commander Yeho. Soon joined her in silence. They did not speak of victory or celebration. They spoke of Youngjai Kim and Soin Park. They spoke of Minjin Choi and Haeyun Young and Seojin. They spoke of 5 humans who would never see Earth again, whose names would be carved into the great memorial wall that stood in the garden of the United Earth Government building. We did not join the Concord to gain power, Una said softly. No, Yeho agreed. We joined so that the next time a world screams for help, no one has to scream alone. They stood together in the darkness. 2 small humans against the vastness of the galaxy, and somewhere out in that vast darkness, species that had never considered cooperation were watching. They were watching, and wondering if perhaps they had been measuring strength wrong all along. Perhaps true strength was not what you could destroy. Perhaps it was what you could protect. Perhaps it was what you refused to let go. Even when the cost was everything, the stars continued their ancient dance, and humanity took its place among them, not as conquerors, not as dominators, but as something the galaxy had never seen before, protectors, and in the end, that was all they had ever wanted to be. I, Commander Thiessen, watched the convoy of refugee ships crawl through the darkness of space and felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. The humans had surprised him on Valora Prime, but he had not survived 3 centuries of galactic politics by accepting surprises gracefully. He intended to show the Concord exactly what humans were made of when survival was truly threatened. The convoy carried 12,000 Valori evacuees. and was escorted by a small human patrol fleet commander, Yeho. Sung led the escort from his flagship, the ESV Resolve, a vessel that would have been considered a light cruiser by the standards of greater powers. Alongside him flew 6 more ships of similar size, and Captain Yoonji Beek's patrol vessel. The ESV steadfast they were outnumbered and outgunned. By every measure that mattered. That was exactly how Thiessen wanted it. The attack came without warning. 8 vessels bearing no identification markings dropped out of faster-than-light travel and immediately opened fire on the convoy's outer escorts. The shots were carefully calibrated to damage, but not destroy. To threaten but not commit to full engagement. Thiessen wanted the humans afraid. He wanted them to run. He wanted to prove to the galaxy that when their survival was at stake, humans would abandon their principles and reveal themselves as the selfish creatures all species truly were. Unknown vessels engaging, reported Yeho's tactical officer. 8 contacts, Vorak configuration, but no transponders active. Yeho studied the tactical display with the calm expression of a man who had seen worse. He recognized the trap immediately. The attacking ships were positioned to cut off retreat routes while leaving a narrow corridor toward neutral space. They wanted the humans to flee and leave the convoy behind. Pirates, Captain Yoonji suggested over the comlink. Though her tone made clear she knew better. Convenient pirates, Yeho agreed. With military-grade weapons and perfect tactical positioning. Another volley of fire struck the Resolve shields, and warning lights flickered across the bridge. Sir, we cannot win this engagement, the tactical officer reported. Their combined firepower exceeds ours by a factor of 6. And if we stay to fight, we will be destroyed. Yeho looked at the display showing 12,000 Valori civilians huddled in transport ships that had no weapons and no defenses. He thought about Valora Prime. He thought about 5 humans who had died saving strangers. He thought about what it would mean to abandon these people after everything humanity had sacrificed to keep them alive. Bring us about, he ordered. Put the Resolve between the attackers and the convoy. Sir? You heard me. And signal all escorts to form a defensive screen around the transports. Captain Yoonji did not hesitate. The Steadfast swung into position alongside the Resolve, and the other escort ships followed without question. They knew the math as well as their commander did. They chose to ignore Itunji, opened a broadcast channel that would reach every ship in the engagement zone. Attention unidentified vessels, she announced, her voice steady as stone. You will not have them. The attacking ships paused their advance. This was not the response they had been programmed to expect from his flagship hidden at the edge of sensor range. High Commander Thiessen watched with growing confusion. The humans should have run. Every species ran when faced with certain destruction. Self-preservation was the most basic instinct in the galaxy, and no amount of pretty speeches about compassion could override the fundamental drive to survive. But the human ships were not running. They were forming a wall. Yeho opened a direct channel to the lead attacking vessel, cutting through the pretense of anonymity. High Commander Thiessen, he said calmly, I know you are listening. There was a long pause before Thiessen responded, his reptilian face appearing on the view screen with barely concealed surprise. You recognize the tactical signature, Thiessen said. I recognize the strategy, Yeho corrected. You want us to run and prove that we are the same as every other species, that our compassion is just a mask for the same self-interest that drives the galaxy, and is it not? Yeho smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Let me tell you what is going to happen. I, Commander, and you should listen very carefully. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving the screen. Your ships are going to attack us, and we are going to fight back. And we are going to die right here in the darkness between stars. Thiesen's eyes narrowed. You admit defeat? I admit we cannot win, Yeho said. But winning is not the same as stopping. And we are going to make you pay for every centimeter you advance. And when our ships are burning wreckage, you will still have to get through them to reach the convoy. He paused to let his words sink in. And here is the part you should really consider. Yeho continued. When we die here, every human who hears about it will know exactly who killed us. And every species that has been watching Valora Prime will know what you did. And you will have proven to the entire galaxy that the Varak Dominion murders refugees. Thisan's expression flickered. You are bluffing. I'm telling you the truth, Yeho replied. We will die before we let you take a single refugee. And our deaths will cost you more than you can imagine. And if you do not believe me, then come ahead and find out. The channel went silent on the bridge of the Steadfast. Captain Yoonji Beek watched her tactical display and made peace with what was coming. She had joined the fleet because she believed in something bigger than herself. And today she would prove that belief was real. All hands, she announced over internal comms. I will not lie to you about our situation. And I will not pretend we are going to survive this. She paused, gathering her thoughts. What I will tell you is that there are 12,000 people behind us who are counting on us to give them a chance. And there are 5 humans who died on Valora Prime because they refused to abandon strangers. And we are going to honor their sacrifice by doing the same. Her crew responded with silence at first. Then someone began to clap. Sound spread through the ship as every officer and every crew member added their hands to the applause. And Yoonji felt tears pricking at her eyes. Shields to full, she ordered. Weapons charged. And let us show these bastards what humans are made of. The attacking ships advanced on his hidden flagship. Thisan watched the human formation. Hold steady and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. He had calculated human self-preservation instinct with mathematical precision. He had accounted for every variable except one human spite. These small, fragile creatures were going to die rather than give him what he wanted. And they were going to make sure the entire galaxy saw him as the monster who slaughtered them. High Commander, his tactical officer reported. Additional contacts emerging from Full S. Thisan's blood ran cold as he saw the identification codes Galactic Concord Observer Vessel's Ambassador. Unipark's ship arbiter Soline's personal transport. They had all arrived at exactly the wrong moment. Drawn by the distress signal the humans had been broadcasting since the attack began, High Commander, Yuna's voice came over the communication channel. I see you have discovered something interesting about humanity. Thisan said nothing. We are a stubborn species. Yuna continued. We hold grudges, and we remember everyone who hurts us. And we absolutely refuse to abandon people we have promised to protect. She paused. Your move. High Commander. The attacking ships withdrew without another shot being fired as they retreated into the darkness. Yeho slumped back in his command chair and let out a breath he had been holding for what felt like hours. Commander, his communications officer reported. Arbiter Solon is requesting a direct channel. The ancient Moralith appeared on screen. Their crystalline face unreadable. Commander Soong, Solon said slowly. I have witnessed many things in my existence, but I have never seen a species willing to die for strangers. They have no obligation to protect. Yeho straightened in his chair. With respect. Arbiter, we did have an obligation. By what law? By our own, Yeho replied. We made a promise to these people. And promises mean something to humans. Solon was silent for a long moment. Yes, the Arbiter finally said. I am beginning to understand that they do. The great chamber of the Galactic Concord stretched upward like the inside of a hollow mountain. And Ambassador Yuna Park stood at its center feeling very small indeed. She had prepared for this moment for 3 years. But nothing could have readied her for the weight of 10,000 alien eyes watching her every breath. The Concorde's orbital station hung above a neutral world where no species held power. And within its walls, the fate of civilizations was decided by those strong enough to claim a voice. Humanity wanted that voice. 50 years. They had waited as observers, watching from the edges, while greater species carved up the galaxy between them. 50 years of proving they could follow the rules. Now they asked to be equals. And the chamber answered with silence that felt like laughter. Counselor Vethel rose from the Threskin delegation, his massive insectoid form casting shadows across the speaking floor. He stood 3 meters tall, with armored plates covering his body and mandibles that could crush stone. The Threskin had conquered their way into the Concorde, and they measured all other species by the same bloody standard. The humans request membership, Vethel said, his voice carrying through the translation systems like grinding metal. Let us examine what they offer. He gestured toward Una with one clawed limb. Their bodies are fragile and break easily under pressure that would not concern a Threskin child. Murmurs of agreement rippled through several delegations. Their technology remains centuries behind the standard of true spacefaring. Peoples, more murmurs. Their territory spans 17 systems, a number so small it would be amusing if it were not simply sad. Una kept her face calm even as her heart pounded against her ribs. She had known this would happen. Humanity had studied the Concorde for 50 years, and they understood exactly how power worked. Here species proved their worth through strength military might earned. Respect technological superiority commanded. Attention resource dominance guaranteed survival. Humanity had none of these things in quantities that would impress anyone in this chamber. I must ask, Vethel continued, turning to address the full assembly, what purpose would accepting such a species serve beyond charity? And the Concorde does not deal in charity. Arbiter. Solon shifted in their crystalline throne at the highest point of the chamber. The Moralith were ancient beyond measure, their bodies made of living mineral that grew and changed over millennia. They had founded the Concorde in an age when most current member species were still learning to use fire. The human application follows proper procedure, Solon said, their voice like wind through crystal chimes. They have earned the right to present their case. Vethal's mandibles clicked with poorly hidden contempt. Then let them present, and let us judge accordingly. Commander Yeho Sung stood at Yuna's right side, his military uniform crisp and his posture perfect. He had fought in the last great war on Earth, the one that had finally united humanity under a single government. He had seen strength in its ugliest forms. He had also seen what came after. Ambassador, he said quietly, they want us to fail. I know, Una replied without moving her lips. That is exactly why we will not. She stepped forward into the light that marked the speaking position, and the chamber fell silent once more. Honored members of the Galactic Concorde, she began, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. I will not waste your time by arguing that humanity deserves membership because we are strong in the ways you understand strength. This caused a stir among the delegations. Admitting weakness was not how the game was played. We are not the strongest. Una continued. We are not the fastest or the smartest or the most advanced. And by every measure this chamber uses to judge worth, we fall short. Vethel leaned forward with obvious interest. Had expected the human to argue and boast as every other applicant species had done. But I ask you to consider a different question, Una said. Not whether humanity has strength, but whether humanity understands what strength is for, before anyone could respond. An alert tone cut through the chamber. Every delegation received the emergency transmission at the same moment. and the great hall erupted in confused noise. Arbiter Solon raised one crystalline limb for silence. "We have received a priority distress signal," the ancient being announced. "The colony world Velora Prime has suffered catastrophic geological collapse, and the Velori government requests immediate assistance." Information flowed across display screens throughout the chamber. Velora Prime was home to 11 million Velori, a small and delicate species who built their civilization in underground caverns. Those caverns were now collapsing. The survival projections appeared on screen, and Yuna felt her blood run cold without intervention. 8 million would die within 40 cycles, with standard response times. The number dropped only slightly. "The Velori are not members of this Concord," Bethel stated flatly. "They hold observer status only and have contributed nothing of value to galactic affairs." "They have no military," another delegate added. "No significant resources," said a third. "No strategic importance," finished a fourth. Yuna watched as species after species dismissed 11 million lives is simply not worth the effort. This was how the Concord worked. This was the strength they valued. Arbiter Solon looked across the chamber with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. "Does any delegation wish to formally propose a response to this crisis?" Silence answered. The Velori were too weak to matter, and no species would spend resources on those who could offer nothing in return. Jeho touched Yuna's arm. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "this is our moment." Yuna understood. She stepped forward again, this time without waiting for permission to speak. "Humanity formally volunteers to lead the response to the Velora Prime disaster," she declared, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. The chamber erupted. "On what authority?" Bethal demanded. "On the authority of basic decency." Yuna shot back. 11 million people are dying, and this assembly is discussing whether they matter enough to save. The humans lack the capability for such an operation, another delegate argued. "Then we will find the capability," Yuna responded. "We will send every ship we can spare, every doctor and engineer and rescue worker, and we will dig through the rubble until we have saved everyone we possibly can." Arbiter Solon regarded her with an expression that might have been curiosity. "And what do you expect in return for this effort?" "Ambassador Park?" Yuna met those ancient crystalline eyes without flinching. "Nothing," she said simply. "We expect nothing because we are not doing this for reward. And we are not doing this for political advantage or strategic gain." She paused to let her words sink in. "We are doing this because people need help. And that is reason enough for humans." The chamber fell into uncertain silence. This was not how the game was played. This was not how strength was demonstrated. Mathael rose again, his massive form radiating confusion that bordered on anger. "If the humans wish to waste their resources on a doomed effort, let them. But this changes nothing about their application for membership. On the contrary," Arbiter Solon said slowly, "I believe this changes everything." The ancient Miralith turned to address the full assembly. "The humans have requested the opportunity to demonstrate strength in their own way, and I hereby grant that request, and we shall see what their way reveals." Yuna bowed her head in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Arbiter." "Do not thank me yet, Ambassador Park," Solon replied. "You have 30 cycles to show this Concord something it has not seen in 10,000 years. And I am not certain you will survive the attempt." Yuna turned to Jeho as they prepared to leave the chamber around them. Delegates whispered and debated. Most were already calculating how to benefit from humanity's inevitable failure. "Commander," she said quietly, "signal our fleet. What should I tell them?" Yuna looked up at the stars visible through the chamber's transparent ceiling, thinking of 11 million strangers waiting to die in the dark. "Tell them we have work to do." The first human ships arrived at Velora Prime before any other species had finished. calculating whether the rescue was cost-effective or not. Warships or gleaning vessels of technological wonder, they were converted cargo haulers with medical equipment strapped to their hulls. Transport ships packed with volunteers who had left their lives behind within hours of receiving the call. And old patrol boats retrofitted with search and rescue gear. Dr. Minji Cho stood at the viewport of the lead vessel as they entered orbit. And what she saw below made her stomach clench with dread. The surface of Valora Prime was cracked like broken glass, with massive fissures running across entire continents where the underground cavern systems had collapsed. Plumes of toxic gas rose from wounds in the planet's crust. Somewhere beneath that devastation, millions of Valori were trapped in the darkness, waiting for help that the galaxy had decided would never come. Initial scans complete, reported her assistant, a young engineer named Taiwan. The main population centers were built in cavern networks at depths of 2 to 5 kilometers. And approximately 60% of those caverns have fully collapsed. And the other 40%? Partially stable, but failing. And we have maybe 70 cycles before total collapse. Minji closed her eyes and took a slow breath. The numbers were impossible. The timeline was impossible. Everything about this mission screamed failure. Then we better get started, she said in the surface. Sergeant Do Wang Li led the first rescue team into the ruins of what had once been a thriving Valori city. The air was thick with dust and poison, and every human wore full environmental suits that made movement slow and clumsy. The gravity generators that had once made this world comfortable were failing, creating pockets where rescuers suddenly weighed twice as much or floated off the ground entirely. Spreading out in search pattern delta, Dohan ordered through his comm unit. Remember your training, and remember why we are here. His team moved into the collapsed structures with careful determination. The Valori had built their homes from a beautiful crystalline material that now lay shattered across the ground like broken dreams. And beneath that wreckage, the rescuers could hear voices calling out, small voices, frightened voices, voices that had been screaming for help for days. While the galaxy debated whether they mattered, observer Catherine watched the human operation from a safe distance, recording everything for his report to Counselor Vethalth. Threskin military attach had been sent to document humanity's inevitable failure. But what he saw confused him deeply. The humans were everywhere at once. They worked in shifts that seemed to have no end, with exhausted teams being replaced by fresh ones in a constant rotation that never stopped. When their equipment failed, they improvised. When their supplies ran low, they shared. When the planet itself seemed to fight against them, they simply pushed harder. Catherine observed a human medic give her personal oxygen supply to a trapped Valori child while her own readings dropped to dangerous levels. He watched engineers work for 18 hours straight to stabilize a collapsing tunnel, refusing to leave even when ordered to rest. He saw a rescue worker carry wounded Valori on his back through toxic gas, making trip after trip until his legs gave out beneath him. None of it made sense in the deepest section of the rescue zone. Dohan's team picked up a faint life sign reading. Multiple survivors, Taiwan reported, his voice tight with urgency. Family cluster of 23 Valori trapped behind collapsed infrastructure. And they have been down there for 6 days. Can we reach them? The approach tunnel is unstable, and there is a 70% chance of secondary collapse if we attempt extraction. Dohan looked at his team. They looked back at him with eyes that held no doubt. We are going in, he said. The tunnel was a nightmare of broken stone and failing supports. Every step brought the sound of cracking and grinding as the weight of an entire world pressed down on the narrow passage. Twice the ceiling partially gave way, forcing the team to dig themselves out before continuing at the end of the tunnel. They found them 23 Valori huddled together in a small pocket of stable space. Their delicate bodies wrapped around each other for warmth and comfort. Among them was a young female named Tealish, who had kept her family unit alive through 6 days of darkness by rationing their water and singing songs to keep the children calm when the humans appeared. She thought she was dreaming. "We are here to help," Do-hwan said, his voice gentle despite the environmental suit that made him look like a monster. "We are going to get you out." Tealish stared at him with huge eyes that reflected the light of his helmet lamp. "Why?" she asked in halting common tongue. "We are nobody important. You are important to us," Do-hwan replied simply. The extraction took 4 hours. The tunnel collapsed twice more during the process, and the humans formed living shields to protect the Valori from falling debris when a massive section of ceiling gave way near the exit. 2 human rescuers threw themselves over a cluster of Valori children without hesitation. The rocks crushed them both. Their names were Youngjae Kim and Soin Park, volunteers who had left comfortable lives on Earth because they could not stand by while strangers suffered. They died saving 4 children they had never met and would never know. When the survivors finally reached the surface, Catherine approached Do-hwan with confusion burning in his compound eyes. "2 of your people died," the Threskin said. 2 humans lost their lives for 19 Valori who offer nothing of value to your species. Do-hwan was removing his helmet, his face streaked with dust and tears. "They did not die for value," he said quietly. "They died because children were in danger and they could do something about it. But the exchange is unequal," Catherine insisted. "Human lives for Valori lives when the Valori have no power, no resources, no strategic importance." Do-hwan looked at the Threskin observer with something that might have been pity. "You really do not understand. Do you? Explain it to me." "They needed us," Do-hwan said, gesturing toward the rescued Valori who were being rushed to medical stations. "That is all the reason we required. And that is all the reason we will ever need." Catherine had no response, had studied human tactics and human technology and human history, but nothing in his preparation had warned him about this. This willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers, this refusal to calculate the cost of compassion, this strength that looked like weakness until you saw what it could accomplish. Tealish approached the human sergeant before being taken for medical treatment. She was small and fragile and still shaking from her ordeal, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I do not understand your kind," she said, "but I will never forget what you did for us." Do-hwan knelt down to meet her eyes. "You do not need to understand us," he said gently. "You just need to know that you are not alone anymore around them." The rescue operation continued. Humans dug through rubble and carried survivors and mourned their dead, without ever stopping to ask if the effort was worth it. The galaxy had written off 11 million Valori as acceptable losses. Humanity had a different opinion.